Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about players to watch. All around this conference, there are so many talented wide receivers, and a number of them might even get a chance to get to in that last segment. But at the end of the day, all those players are going to be really, really fun to watch. I'm keeping a very close eye on Deion Burks over there at Oklahoma. If they're going to hit at the level that they very much want to this year, he's going to have to be a huge piece of that. So that'll be a fun one to watch, no doubt about it. Let's get into some picks, why don't we? We have so many different things to break down in this conference, and I have a championship pick that I don't know if people are going to love too much, but we'll get to that at the very end. For now, game of the year, it's Alabama at Georgia. As far as I'm concerned, these are the two teams that define this conference until further notice. These are the two teams, this is the matchup that will define this conference for a very long time, as far as I'm concerned. And this time, Alabama does go to Georgia. Georgia has a very impressive home winning record going right now. I believe 29 games, somewhere in that kind of ballpark. Alabama would love to ruin that. There's no doubt about it. Kirby Smart would love to get over the hump that has been Alabama. We thought it was Kirby Smart for a long time, and then last year made it look a little bit worse. So they're obviously trying to get back on track over there in Athens, and this would be a huge one for both these teams, really, because both these teams are very likely to start undefeated, be undefeated once this game comes around. Alabama does have Florida State and Wisconsin, so maybe there's a little bit of a shakeup there, but I'd be a little bit surprised. This is a marquee matchup, and if Georgia loses this one, they're in a very, very precarious place with still Texas coming up, with still Ole Miss coming up in Florida. Alabama, if they lose this one, they're in a little bit of a precarious position. They got LSU, they got Tennessee, they got Auburn at the end of the year that very much wants to knock them out of the CFP if they get the chance again. So it's one of those situations where, as far as I'm concerned, these are the two teams that define this conference right now. Whenever they match up in the regular season, it is the game of the year. Obviously, Texas-Georgia is going to be in this. Alabama-LSU was a part of this conversation, but Alabama-Georgia is the defining game of this conference over the last decade. I think it's going to be that way in this year as well. Florida at LSU on September 13th is my underrated, I suppose, game of the year. You could call it underrated, overlooked, whatever. I think it's a tone setter for this conference in a number of different ways. Let's say DJ Lagway's healthy, and they go into Baton Rouge and they get a huge win on the road at LSU. I think everyone's looking up. I think everyone's looking over their shoulder at Florida and saying that it might be just a CFP team, especially if they've done incredible things and beaten Miami before, or this might be after or before the Miami game, weirdly enough. But at the end of the day, if they're undefeated coming out of this matchup and they have beaten LSU, they will be looked at as a CFP contender. There's no two ways about that. If LSU wins, I think they're in a really good spot for the CFP, even if they were to lose that first game to Clemson, especially if they were to win that first game against Clemson. Then you're in a position where you might run away with this conference. Now, obviously, quite a bit of work to be done the rest of the way, but I think when you look at this conference, there's a number of teams that are kind of vying for that fourth spot. I think Florida's one of those teams that could possibly pop up into that spot. I think LSU is one of those teams that could just stick where they are right now at 4, and I think they could very well vault up to number 1. I think this is going to be a game that kind of decides the direction for both these teams the rest of the year. Disappointing team of the year, I'm going to go with South Carolina. And this is a little bit interesting because I don't think it's going to be a bad team. I think Lenore Sellers is probably good for about 7 or 8 wins by himself, frankly. But I do think we're underestimating some of the departures on defense and wide receiver. I think when you lose guys on the back end like Nick Eamon-Worry, it's not easy to replace. I think when you lose a guy like Demetrius Knight Jr., it is going to be a nightmare to replace that guy both on and off the field. And then the wide receiver room. If Nick Harbor can put it together, great. I think that's going to be a really solid player. I think he's going to have to be if this team's going to be successful. But outside of that, I don't feel confident in really any of those players, and I'd be lying if I said I feel really confident about Nick Harbor hitting this year. So the way I look at South Carolina is a uniquely talented quarterback that's surrounded by a lot of questions. And I do think they have the ability to be a good team. I also think Dowell Loggins moving on is a little bit bigger of a deal than it's being made out to be right now. I just think it's going to be a step back. I don't necessarily think they're going to bottom out and go 5-7 or anything crazy. I do think they could go 8-4, 7-5, and be very disappointed after a year where they definitely felt like they were going to make a run at a possible CFP. My surprise team of the year is the Florida Gators, and I'm going to do it. It might be a mistake, and people are more than welcome to laugh at me if it is, but This team is really, really talented all across the football team. DJ Lagway, if he is healthy, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country as far as I'm concerned. They have the ability to pull this off. Obviously, it is a little bit contingent on DJ Lagway being healthy and being on the field for me, but at the end of the day, I think when you look at this team across the board, I think the run game is going to be about as good as you're going to find in this conference, maybe the best in this conference. A&M will have something to say about that, but at the end of the day, they're going to have a very good run game. I love the offensive line, especially Jake Slaughter in the middle, of course. Love Caleb Banks and Tyreek Sapp on the defensive side of the ball. I think the wide receiver room, even without Dallas Wilson, now you would love to get him back as soon as possible, but even without him, I think they have plenty of talent in that room to make it happen. Billy Napier's got to be a little bit better. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think anyone's, going against that. But I do think there's going to be moments this year where we look up and you say, Florida's in a better position than I thought they were going to be, and they might go down to the wire as one of those teams that is right around the CFP and one big-time win away from possibly joining the CFP towards the end of the year. Elijah Griffin, defensive tackle over at Georgia, is my freshman of the year as far as I'm concerned. A freak of nature in every sense of the word. When you talk about a kid that comes into Georgia as a defensive tackle, you're usually talking about him in the future. You're usually talking about him as a traits guy that you can unlock in his sophomore or junior year because there's so many talented guys in front of him. Now, there's still talented guys in front of him, whether you want to talk about Christian Miller or Jordan Hall or any number of guys for Georgia. He's going to play, and he's going to play a whole lot. I think he has a Jalen Carter level player in his career, not necessarily this year, but I do think he's going to start really strong. He's going to be an absolute force in the middle for that team. I think when you look at the defensive tackle group for Georgia, comparative to years before, not quite as strong, not quite as deep as it has been before. This guy's going to make that a non-problem as far as I'm concerned. I think him, along with Christian Miller and a couple other guys, are going to make that group plenty good, and I think Elijah Griffin probably going to be a starter right next to Christian Miller by the end of the year. My transfer of the year is Isaiah Horton, the wide receiver over there at Alabama. I loved this pickup from Alabama. I like Jeremy Bernard. I think Ryan Williams is going to be a star in this league. I think they needed a guy that was just a little bit of everything, that had the route running ability, that wasn't, was more than comfortable to take the underneath routes and make something out of them. Not necessarily the outright over-the-top guy, but just a really professional player. And they talk about him that way in practice. They say he's probably the best route runner in the entire group, and it's a lot of good route runners in that wide receiver group. So I think he's going to be a huge target for Ty Simpson, especially a guy that I don't expect to be, a uniquely incredible player, passer down the field. I think Isaiah Horton's going to be a huge player for this team, and I think he's going to rack up some really, really impressive stats this year, maybe even outdo Ryan Williams. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but I think this guy has that level of ability, and I think he could put on a show this year for the Crimson Tide. Offensive Player of the Year, I'm going to go with Garrett Nussmeier, and I think there's a number of different guys you could go for with this spot. The way that I look at it is I think this LSU defense is going to be better. I think they're going to make improvements. It's almost inevitable with the talent level and Blake Baker getting more comfortable in that position. I still think they're going to have to score some points. I still think they're going to be put kind of feet to the fire, have to make some big-time plays down the stretch of games. I think Garrett Nussmeier will make those plays. I think he's going to temper down some of the interception troubles that he had a year ago. I think the wide receiver core is better around him than it was a year ago, and I think this kid's going to put on a show. I'll be totally honest. I think he's going to do an incredible job running this offense, and I think it's an offense that, as long as you run it really well, you're going to put up some crazy numbers. I think Garrett Nussmeier wins Offensive Player of the Year in a year where I think defenses probably dominate this conference. I think Garrett Nussmeier kind of shines through in a lot of ways. Defensive Player of the Year was Colin Simmons, and I thought about Anthony Hill here. Frankly, I just went between those two. I think there's some other great options around the conference, but those two guys to me are absolute difference makers. I'm going to go with Colin Simmons. He had 9 sacks a year ago, and he didn't play every snap until much later in the year. He was mainly a third down, pass down type guy that they would bring off the bench and let him go to work. And he had was very forceful very early on in the year, made plays pretty much throughout the year. But now he's going to be on the field just about every snap. Now, the edge room is incredibly talented and deep at Texas, so he will be rotating off the field plenty, but he's going to be on the field much more than he was a year ago. I think this guy can get to 14 or 15 sacks this year. I think he is that level of good. I think he's going to put up some incredible, incredible numbers. And I think by the end of the season, you're going to look up and say, man, Texas really maybe hasn't even fully unlocked that offense, and they're still winning games pretty comfortably. It's going to be in large part because of Colin Simmons and really the rest of the pass rush around Texas. I'm going to go with Billy Napier for Coach of the Year. I'm buying in. I'm going to go down with the ship this year. It might just be a little bit muddy at times, and especially if DJ Lagway isn't healthy, this one's going to get sketchy fast. But at the end of the day, I think he's going to keep things afloat. I think he's going to do some really, really good coaching this year. I think he has the talent in front of him. I think he knows what the quarterback he has. As long as that guy is on the field, I think Billy Napier in Florida can do some special things this year. I think he's going to be someone that totally changes his image in the national headlines this upcoming year, from a guy that just can't hack it in the SEC to a guy that might be building something pretty special down there in Gainesville. Obviously a very thin line with the injury trouble that DJ Lagway has had, but I think they're going to be more than fine there, and I think Billy Napier really changes the narrative around him this year. My championship matchup is Alabama versus Texas. I know it sounds a little bit crazy with some people, but Alabama has a football team. They have a very, very good defense, one of the best in the entire country. I think the team on the other side has the best in the entire country. In Texas, I think Arch Manning is going to work out enough. I think there's going to be some bumps along the way. There's going to be some moments, even in that first game, where it looks like he's making his first couple of starts as a real starter for Texas. But at the end of the day, I think these two teams have the defenses. I think they have the head coaches and the play callers. I think they have the weapons on the outside to just make everything easier on these new quarterbacks. I think they end up meeting in Atlanta. I think Texas gets back to Atlanta for a second year in a row, and I think they lose for a second year in a row. I think Alabama Crimson Tide win the SEC this upcoming year. I love the offensive line. I think it's the very best in the entire country, maybe right up there with Penn State, kind of battling for that number one spot. I think the defensive line is not too far off with LT Overton, all those beasts on that side. The wide receiver room is really, really special with Ryan Williams and Isaiah Horton and Jeremy Bernard. I think people are going to have to delete some Kalen DeBoer tweets. I think he's very, very good at what he does. I think reuniting with Ryan Grubb is a huge thing for this team. I think Alabama wins this conference, and I think a lot of people in SEC country are very upset about that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be an all-over-the-place conference. I could see maybe 6 or 7 teams finding a way to win this thing. Probably those top 4 have the best odds by a pretty comfortable margin in my mind, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be all over the place. I think the team that has dominated this conference for quite some time finds its way right back to the top of it, and it's going to be the Alabama Crimson Tide. As upsetting as that might sound for some people out there, I think they have a very good team. I think they have a fantastic head coach that people have just written off a little too quickly. But this is going to be an incredible season. There's no two ways about that. I love all these conferences. I think all of these conferences are going to be very hotly debated towards the end of the year. All of them have teams that can come out of nowhere and make some big-time plays and really become a CFP team throughout this year. It's going to be all over the place. It is going to be absolutely crazy. And tomorrow, we'll do a little bit of a wrap-up. We'll talk about, all of my picks from this past week. We'll do, just kind of a rundown of everything I picked. I think I'm going to delay my playoff picks and my Heisman pick until Monday just to give myself a little bit more time to fully kind of form those opinions. And there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I want to talk about all the quarterbacks that were named their starter, including a guy up there at Boston College that I think could do some really special things this year. Want to talk about that tomorrow. John Gruden, interested in coaching in the SEC. Want to get into that a little bit, and a number of other stuff, maybe a little bit more Arch Manning talk. As upsetting as that might be for some people, I want to talk about how some people are just setting him up for failure. But we'll talk about all that tomorrow. We'll get into all of that craziness. And then on Monday, I promise I will give my full picks for this upcoming season and the playoff and the Heisman and all of that good stuff on Monday. But I just had enough stuff I wanted to talk about, including the AP poll tomorrow. So we'll get all of that off our chest tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in to all of the preview shows. Means the world to me. Please do like, comment, subscribe, do all of that good stuff. Really does help me out over here, and would love to keep doing this for y'all. Absolutely will. As we get closer to the season, only 9 days out, and you can almost taste it. So cannot wait for this thing to get underway. Those are all of my conference picks as of right now. We'll get to my playoff picks on Monday, but I will see you guys tomorrow to talk about all of the craziness that has happened throughout this week as I've been picking all this stuff. So thank you once again for listening in. I'll see you guys tomorrow.